Good morning, Michigan. Let's talk about being naive. How much do you really know about your government, about your federal government, about your state government, about your local government? How much do you really know, and what's really going on? Tony Daunt is here, the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund. Nice to see you here in studio, sir.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Our neighbor downtown Lansing here, but I know you do business all over the state and all over the country. When we say that we live in a free society, that America is the land of the free and the home of the brave, is it true?
Obviously, at the Michigan Freedom Fund and the work I do, I think it's in short supply sometimes, especially dealing with government. But when you look at the alternatives across the country and alternatives throughout human history, I think that we are certainly, this is a wonderful place to live and to be at this moment in time in the United States of America. We should all feel blessed because it really is it's quite free. Obviously, there's challenges, lots to do. There's always room for improvement in the way our government operates and what our politicians do, what they do for us or to us. But I can't complain.
I don't know who said it, but I've heard the phrase, the price of freedom is vigilance. And I always thought that meant from outside invaders, but sometimes it's from the inside. Absolutely.
You have to, it will be, I think it was Ronald Reagan said that it's never more than one generation away from extinction. And that's because it's very easy, as you see with some of the people, on the left in particular today who they don't learn the lesson of socialism and of communism, of how easy it is for things that may seem like a good idea. They're well intentioned to take care of the people, to help them, not have them take risk and give them what they want to survive. That very easily devolves into authoritarianism and systems of government that end up collapsing. Just look at Venezuela. And it's easy to fall into that trap of you don't want to take risks, you just want to be taken care of. And we work hard at the Michigan Freedom Fund to push back against that. That ultimately, free minds and free will are the best option for humans.
Do you think that campaigns bring out the most outrageous ideas in an attempt to get attention? For instance, Senator Elizabeth Warren saying that college should be free for everybody. And then the other day I heard something about a basic living wage. One of the candidates thought we should all be paid a certain amount of money every year from the government. Is that just because of, or do people really want to do that?
I think most of the time, I take people at their word when they say those things. And if they're proposing those policies, we should take them seriously and we should work to refute them and convince people of the reasons why they're wrong and why that's such a terrible idea. And that just providing security and stability for the sake of doing so without instilling the values of hard work and doing things for yourself and the beauty of a job and the dignity that comes from that, we should refute those policies and show them why that's wrong. That the kind of the old biblical adage of teach a man to fish. Mm-hmm. And I think campaigns can be outrageous, and unfortunately, both sides have a tendency to say outrageous things just to get the headlines, and it's kind of just one after another. See who can one up themselves until we get to the most outrageous statement of the day, and then we start over tomorrow.
Is the current president the most outrageous of all? Is he the king of outrage?
Well, he certainly has a way with words. He plays the media like a violin many times.
Is that what it is? Yeah.
I think that, very honestly, I had my issues with Donald Trump when he was running for office. He certainly wasn't my first choice. But the work that he's done and the policies that he's put in, for the most part, are things that most traditional conservatives would agree with, from tax policy in particular to the judicial appointments that he's made. But I wish he would maybe change his methodology a little bit, the way he talks and the things he says. But you look at the people on the left and the things that they say and the way that they behave. It certainly makes it easy for people like me to say, well, if that's the alternative, well then, it's no question who I'm supporting.
And the public opinion seems to bear out. He's got a very high approval rating, even compared to President Obama.
Things I see in the media are, the numbers that I see are he's generally right around the same kind of approval rating that Obama had at this stage of his presidency. We all know
40, 45.
Yep. And that's, I think, a product of the polarization in this state and in this country of, there's a solid 40 to 45% of the people who you could do pretty much whatever you want, and they're going to support you. on the left and on the right, and then you're kind of fighting. It seemed like it used to be you're fighting over that middle to see if you could win them over, and now it seems the opposite. You're fighting to see who can tick them off the least the day closest to election day, and they're like, well, I guess that's the choice I'm going to go with. And so it's an interesting situation. But there's lots going on here in Michigan. Lots of policies floating. Got with the roads. We've got the auto no fault debate that's hot and heavy right now. The budget season is in show, and now we're headed up to Mackinac here in a couple weeks, where everybody will get together and pretend they didn't say those nasty things about each other.
And they never will again until they get off the Shepler ferry.
That's right.
It's a whole new ballgame. It is a kumbaya element to that Detroit Regional Chamber Policy Conference, and maybe the setting has something to do with it. But
and
close quarters.
And I love the work I do. I love pushing for freedom, for lower taxes, for holding Democrats accountable, holding people like Dana Nessel accountable for the bigoted remarks that she says, for the reckless behavior of throwing out the fact that a retired judge had a warrantless complaint filed against him. I mean, that's reckless. That's not how an attorney general should behave. But also understand that everybody, for the most part, they believe what they're doing, and when you go up to a conference like that, in order to get anything done, you got to work together. You got to be kind. You got to treat people with dignity and respect. And it's an interesting situation.
What happens if you find yourself in a horse carriage with the attorney general?
Well, I'll look over my shoulder to make sure that I got an escape route. But I think if she wanted to have a discussion, if she recognized me and wanted to talk about these things, I would hold my ground, and I'd let her know why I think it's reprehensible to talk about the faithful the way she does, to make snide remarks about Catholics and their rosary. In many ways, I think it's even worse for her and her office to have done what they did to Judge Michael Talbot. And there's legitimate concerns to be raised about his involvement because of that, of his work with the diocese. But to do it in that fashion, to just kind of throw out there recklessly that, well, have you checked with the Attorney Grievance Commission? That's shameful.
We'll continue with Tony Daunt, Executive Director of the Michigan Freedom Fund. It's Michael Patrick Shiels, radio stations all across Michigan, and back in a flash. Radio stations across the state of Michigan, Michael Patrick Shiels through the AT&T microphones. Tony Daunt is here, Executive Director of the Michigan Freedom Fund, who is a member at St. Gerard on the west side of Lansing there. And I always remember Father Mark Inglet used to be there as well, and then he went over to St. John's. And he said that he was asked, how many people can fit inside St. Gerard? And he said it sleeps 1,000. In any case,
he must give some amazing sermons.
Now, how did you? First of all, the Michigan Freedom Fund. What is it?
We are, it's a conservative advocacy group. We've been around for around 6 years now, and got its start with the fight to make Michigan a right-to-work state. And, since then have kind of evolved into not just defending that policy, but pushing for conservative policies across the state, whether it be related to tax policy, economic policy, fighting against corporate welfare, corporate handouts, protecting free speech on our college campuses, you name it. If it's a freedom, liberty-minded idea, we're going to be there fighting for it and defending it. And
so for you, what's your background? How'd you get into the racket?
Oh, gosh, no other discernible skills, I guess.
Well, you found one, that's for sure.
I went to Michigan State, and when I came here, my uncle, Steve, I'll give a shout-out to him, Steve Daunt, has worked in the House Republican Policy Office and in the legislature for a number of years, since, the early 90s, really, and he had some room in the office he was working in for former State Representative Bill Bobier from the 101st District. And I got started there as a part-timer and just have kind of made my way. I've always been a political junkie.
Where?
Love politics. I was that kid in high school that could get all 20 out of 20, in sophomore year of high school on the pre-class civics quiz. And so I've been, State House, State Senate, U.S. Senate, the governor's office, and a couple stints with the Michigan Republican Party, among other things. And I just I'm passionate about this stuff, and I love the Michigan Freedom Fund, the work we do fighting on behalf of the taxpayers of the state of Michigan and holding the politicians accountable, whether they're Republicans or Democrats.
What lit your fire initially at that young age?
Oh gosh,
'Cause it could have been anything.
I think this sounds kind of silly, but I think one of the main things was, I had a paper route from the time I was 10 years old. And so every day after school, I would come home and I would roll the newspapers to go out and deliver them. And before I would do that, I would read through the news. And so I was a kind of a current history buff, and I was always on top of all that stuff. And so I kind of was able to discern who I liked and who I didn't. And Ronald Reagan was somebody that I remember distinctly my parents being fond of, and I just kind of grown from there.
Gosh, I had the same experience. I can remember it in Lincoln Park, Michigan on Ford Road. Ford Road was like 5 blocks long. And I can, clear as day, I could draw it if you asked me to, remember the front of the Detroit News, and the headline was, "The fate of Iran is now in the hands of the Ayatollah." I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I can remember that word for word because it was dramatic every day to see those headlines while you passed them out.
Yep.
It was hard work, too, because back then, did you have to knock on the doors and ask for collection every week like that?
Yep. If
no one was ever home.
Yeah. If they hadn't submitted the envelope, left it on the door. Yep. I'd go out and knock on the door and collect the money.
And by the way, people think that was your first example of true entrepreneurial and opportunity because you had to pay for the papers and then collect for them and pay back the newspaper. Remember, did it work that way for you too?
I believe so. And I was lucky that my parents helped so much with kind of helping me learn the business side of things of that and making sure I went out and collected the money so that they weren't left fronting the bill all the time. And you're right. I think having a job from that early age is beneficial, and I think whether my parents would have had the financial ability or not to support me, and I wouldn't have needed that job to do certain things I wanted, I think it would have been good for them to force me to do it because it's taught me a lot of principles that carry forward today. And it's part of the reason I consider myself such a strong conservative is see the dignity in hard work and the dignity in doing things for yourself. And obviously there are instances where people, through no fault of their own, fall on hard times, and we should be there to help lift them up and to give them a helping hand and get them back on track. But if we just follow the path of those, so many on the left, and even some, who purport to be on the right, of just kind of giving them what they need, you're doing them a disservice because ultimately they never get out of the situation or the station in life that they're in.
George W. Bush used to say he was a compassionate conservative. That seems like what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I would contend that for the most part, if you're speaking about it correctly, it's oftentimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it. That conservatism itself is compassionate. It doesn't need the qualifier in front of it. It is the best way to live your life, to be conservative in how you comport yourself and in the things that you believe, knowing that it's foolish to think that the government or an individual or any organization, if it's so eager to force a policy on you, you should be questioning the reason for that and really dig into it before you allow them to have their way.
Who would it be that you would admire most in politics? Because you've met them, as you said, you've been in the halls of power, in the back offices, you've seen sausage made.
Well, that is a really good question. Obviously, I would say that Steve, my uncle who has helped get me into this, is just he's a very even-keeled guy, and he doesn't get too excited, he doesn't get too down, and has been there to kind of help me along the way for these decisions I've made. Another individual would be Greg McNeely, the chairman of the Michigan Freedom Fund. Hired me in 2004 at the Michigan Republican Party, and just is very committed to his beliefs. And I don't agree with him on everything, but certainly he's been there to help me along the way. And people, just anybody who is committed to their beliefs and goes about it, is willing to fight for it, but also understands that at the end of the day, if you lose, you dust yourself off and you get back at it. You don't pout, you don't lash out.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that Dennis Muchmore is a big fan of yours, by the way, when your name comes up.
Well, that's very nice to hear. Dennis is a wonderful guy, and I had the pleasure of working with him over in the governor's office for a while.
The old school gentleman.
Absolutely. He is one of the finest.
And Greg McNeely's a gentleman, too.
Yeah, most of the time.
Well, he likes to throw a little fire, but he does so in a very gentlemanly way.
Where do you think I learned it?
We'll be back with more. It's Michael Patrick Shiels all across Michigan and at mibigshow.com.
Yeah.
Michael Patrick Shiels, radio stations across the state of Michigan through the AT&T microphones with Tony Daunt, the executive director of the Michigan Freedom Fund, here in our Capitol studio. Question for you. How can we live in a state that will elect Donald Trump president and yet continually elect Democrat U.S. senators? Someone from the outside would look in and say, I don't get it.
Well, I think it goes to show that people, despite the partisanship and kind of the partisan divide, there are still people who, they're willing to split their ticket, and people will vote based on the candidate. And if they have a fond feeling of somebody, even if they may not agree with them politically on a number of issues, if they get good customer service from them, if they have an issue, a constituent issue, and they call in and their staff treats them well and takes care of them, they're going to have a fond feeling about that. And not everybody is committed to the ideological warfare as somebody like me who does this on a daily basis and is trying to push the policy, the state in a more conservative leaning direction. And it also it lays waste to this whole idea of that Michigan over the last 10 years has been so the lines have been so partisan gerrymandered that that's the only reason Republicans have had a majority. You look at those numbers, and it's interesting you bring this up because I was just talking about this yesterday. In 2012, Republicans won 59 state House seats, and Debbie Stabenow ran for U.S. Senate, and I believe she won 80 or 87 of the 110 state House seats. And so obviously people are willing to look at the candidate. It's not an issue of partisan. It's an issue of candidate and who they think is the better person for the job. And
in other words, if those lines were truly drawn in a partisan way, Debbie Stabenow wouldn't have won in so many districts.
That's exactly right. She would not have won an additional, however, I was really
landslide.
Bad at math, so she wouldn't have won in so many that Republicans also won in.
And would you favor term limits at the federal level?
No.
Would you like to get rid of them at the state level?
Me, Tony Daunt, personally, yes. From a Michigan Freedom Fund perspective, obviously there's different things that would come into it that we would want to look at how it was done. But, I believe firmly that we have term limits, and they're called elections. And if people aren't doing their job, well, then you know what? Rally together and boot them out of office.
The website for the Michigan Freedom Fund?
MichiganFreedomFund.com.
Simple as that.
Yep.
You got Front Lines of Freedom, their bulletin every single week. You get more Tony Daunt if you stay right here. It's Michael Patrick Shiels and at mibigshow.com.